Blue Steel. When I get nervous, it's bad jokes that come out. Action. So Adrienne, let me know what... You can't do that.
Your face. Noah's just gonna pass out on a red hot.
Saying if he goes out, you're giving him Heimlich. Now, back to our scheduled program. All right, hi, I'm Scott Miller, and I'm the Assistant Director at the Heartland's Men Recovery Program.
And I'm Adrienne Miller, and I am the Director of the Women's Recovery Program. So tell me what you were like before you came to Heartland.
I just was a pretty straight-laced individual, did pretty much what I was expected of me. And then I went to college, so I was a designated driver for a few months. Then one day I drank and got drunk. Shortly thereafter, I smoked weed, and after that I did cocaine. I just never looked back for 10 years. And obviously in the middle of it, right before that happened is when you took me to your senior prom. And then afterwards, you dumped me. So that's my story in a nutshell. Well, some of the events that led me to Heartland was I was a 10-year drug addict, and I just couldn't quit in my own strength. I started going to church like 3 years before I came to Heartland, and I had like my spiritual father. We did like one-on-one Bible studies, and he helped me out a lot, but I just kept relapsing. And he told me about a place called Heartland, and he said, you know, Scott, he was like, you just don't seem to be getting it, or maybe this would help you. And I was ready to make a change, so I called my work and I quit, and then I called John Grawl at the Heartland's Recovery Program, and then I came in July of 2010. Tell me about your story. What prompted you to come to Heartland, and tell us a little bit about your recovery process.
I was actually married, obviously to someone else when I came through the program, and he was an addict. I was very naive and didn't realize the extent of his addiction. And I, due to circumstances, we no longer had a place to live. We were pretty much cut off from our family due to our own choices, and they just couldn't handle the mess anymore. And there was a big intervention that happened, and the outcome of the intervention was, why don't you try Sharp's place? You know, the conversation was, you'll have a job, you'll have a place to live, you'll have 3 square meals a day, it can't hurt anything. I was at a point where I was ready for something different, although I didn't realize that I was the problem. My husband then, he definitely had an addiction issue, was in trouble with the law. I made the decision that if he was going to go through this process, then I was going to go through with it too. Shortly after I got here, I was working, and Pastor Charlie came over and introduced himself. And he asked me, why was I here? And I thought I was being very noble, and I'm here to support my husband. And he slammed his hands down on the table, and he said, no, you're not. You're here for a relationship with Jesus Christ. And from that, like, it just, it took me a while to realize that I was here because I was messed up, and all the things that were wrong weren't my husband's fault. I grew up in church, and so I knew about going forward and getting saved. But it was like this time, God's like, I'm not interested in playing games. If you're gonna do this, let's do it. In my program, it was, I had lots of ups and downs. My husband was not ready for change, and I really was. I was just tired of the way that I was. So there was just a lot of growth and maturing that I had to go through in order to get at a place where I was okay if he chose something else.
And I think the process for me, what really probably helped me the most was just submitting to rules. Because before in life is like, if it didn't make sense to me, then I just do it, you know. It was like, this ain't too bad, you know. What does it matter if I go 70 and a 55? Something small, but you get what I mean. So when I came here, I was like, for pretty much my whole life, I have done things my way. And at 30 years old, I was living with my parents. I didn't have an asset to my name. I didn't have any relationship. I thought, well, you know what? Maybe I should try it a different way. And so I just started submitting to the rules. And, it started with the easy ones. Make my bed, put my clothes away and stuff. It's like, pretty much everybody else in my age already had that. They were doing it. I was a little bit late in life. So that's kind of my recovery process. And then God just helped me through it, Them little steps helped me to make wise choices in the bigger steps. So was it difficult, like with your first husband, but then having me come through an addiction problem too? Was that difficult in the early stages of marriage? I guess we're still early.
It was different. I can't say it was necessarily difficult. It was just different. Probably because I was more secure in myself, and definitely having a relationship with Jesus helps, because my identity, the first time I got married, my identity was very much in the fact that I was married, very much in the fact that I had a husband. God had to do a really deep work in me to be okay being single, and then even to be okay getting married again. And so I became more comfortable in my own skin. So it kind of came to that point that even if you did fall off the deep end and relapse or something, I was going to be okay, because I had my relationship with Jesus to sustain me.
I remember that one time.
But
early on.
Yeah, there were fears.
You got concerned.
Scott, I wasn't used to Scott talking about struggling with wanting to use, or dreams of using, or things that are
We're pretty open.
Extremely common. He is, but while we were recording, it just was never something that we talked about. And so one evening, he came to me and he's like, "Yeah, I'm really struggling with this." And then it was like, "Okay, I'm gonna walk to the store. I'll see you later." And I was like, "What?" Because at that point, you weren't really walking anywhere. It was just.
I remember.
So Scott takes off to the store, and anti-anxiety comes out to play, and I was a wreck. I'm like, well, he never goes for walks, and he's obviously, things were tense. There wasn't anything that had happened, but I just remember like things were just kind of like a little edgy. And he tells me that he's struggling with using, and he takes off walking, and I'm like, what if? And then fill in the blank.
If I walked to Casey's 20 miles away?
I don't know. I mean, I had never seen you like that, so I didn't know what your reaction would be, and I certainly didn't realize how I was going to react. So I pick up the phone, and I email Martha Palmer that I'm very concerned about my husband, Scott. So Scott gets a call from Pastor Chris to check on him, which I appreciated, but I didn't know any of that had happened until Scott came home, and he was not happy, and he had right. I definitely could have handled it a lot different, and I do handle it a lot different now. But
that's part of the communication.
It is.
That's what the beauty of marriage is, isn't it? Like, we don't get it right always the first time, but we can walk through stuff like, but that's just even like Christ in our life. We don't always get it right, but he doesn't just throw us at the curb when we get it wrong. So it's just one of them where I do kind of remember it, where it's frustrating, and it's like, if I walk to the store, they can give me a few minutes just to clear my head. And I believe it's like in the spring.
Yeah.
It was kind of a nicer day. And yeah, I didn't appreciate it as much, but I'm thankful that I had a wife who cared enough. And I thought it was cool that Pastor called too, because some people are like, okay, whatever. But that's accountability, and we would definitely work through it. It wasn't that big of an issue.
Well, and so this is something that I wish that would be talked about a little bit more.
Oh, yes.
Is like being comfortable with that vulnerability, because in recovery you have to be vulnerable. Like, you've got to be transparent. You got to have someone that you can.
Well, the thing about it, you didn't talk to Martha to attack me.
No.
To try to be like, hey, guess what? I'm going to try to see what I can do to wreck his life. You did it because you're concerned.
Mm-hmm.
And I would rather have somebody. It's a lot easier to address a situation in the beginning than after the fall or something crazy happened. So
But sorry, go ahead.
I was just more appreciative after the fact. There too.
The comment that really stuck with me when Scott got back is he goes something along the lines like, I need you to be able to handle this kind of information. And if you can't, then I need to find someone who can. Not meaning like we were gonna separate or anything like that, but like he needed to know if he could confide in me when those things were going on or not. And so later on that night or the next morning, I was really upset about it, because I just felt like I had blown it a million different ways. But I remember praying about it, and the Holy Spirit was just like, you are so worried about your husband relapse that you're the one that relapsed. Because I've struggled with depression, I've struggled with anxiety. And so he fought the temptation, but I gave into it. And so it's just realizing that whether there's some sort of a chemical addiction or not, that the worst kind of addiction is the one that lives in our heads. What's some advice that you have to maintain long-term sobriety? Because you've been sober
about 11 years, or a little over 11 years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, some of the tips are remember what you did in the beginning. Because as time goes, you forget about the pain, you forget about the suffering, you forget about the hurts that you've caused your family, yourself. And then you can start getting lax. What's helped me, in my opinion, is I read the Bible daily. I pray daily. To have a relationship, let's just look at it this way. For me and you to have a good relationship, we have to have communication.
Right.
So it's even more important with our relationship with God. Mm-hmm. So I'm only sober because of God. If I didn't believe in God or I didn't care about relationship, I'd go probably back and use. But since I have a fear of God, that's what helps me. But to maintain that relationship, I have to know what He wants, and that's reading His Word. And He wants to hear from me, and that's like me. That's prayer. And then I did make like this a list that I just won't compromise on, and that's I won't drink, I won't use drugs, I won't use nicotine, I won't gamble, and I won't commit sexual immorality in my thoughts or my actions. There's a lot of other stuff I need to improve on. Like I can be a jerk, and I have a temper, and both. But I feel like God helps me in them areas. But I really need to focus on when there's rough days, don't do one of them 6, and I believe that is what's helped me out. So people going to maintain long-term sobriety, you have to figure out what works for you. This is what worked out for me. But the main thing is, if you're going through long-term sobriety, especially as a Christian, you must pray, you must read the Bible, you need to go to church consistently because you need to be around like-minded individuals. The old saying, bird of a feather flocks together, it's true. Yeah. So that's what's helped me. What about you? I know you haven't went through like recovery issues per se, but what have you seen other people do that's helped them to be successful?
Well, I think, like you said, or words of Lori Sharp, read, pray, and obey, going to church, giving back wherever you can, whether that's serving in a church setting or maybe it's helping facilitate meetings. But as your wife, something that I know is that you won't go into a restaurant that serves alcohol by yourself. And so I need to not put him in a position to do that. And so, going back to your hometown, we have an understanding between the two of us that you won't go see such and such person by yourself. Mm-hmm. Or there's certain places where you won't go by yourself. And so as your wife, to number one, support that and not look at it as a weakness, but to also be ready and available if you need me to go with you.
It might be a weakness, but I understand the weakness. So why put yourself? Why get close to that line, or why get close to the fire?
It's an unnecessary temptation that you just don't want to. That you don't need to face. And so, as someone who's never had an addiction married to someone that had an addiction, just being a support and like not, sometimes we can really use people's vulnerabilities against them. So if I know that Scott's not gonna go to an establishment that serves alcohol, well, I'm not gonna ask him to stop by a sports bar and pick up a meal for us to eat at home, because I would be asking him to compromise something that I know that he feels very strongly against.
Well, I think a couple of things that would, like for family members of having their loved ones come in through recovery, you know, a couple of things to probably remember is it's a process.
Yeah.
You know, I remember somebody was like, well, why don't you just quit? I was like, well, that's a novel idea. I was like,
I've never thought of that one before.
yeah, that's why I came to an 18-month program, because I could just shut it off whenever I wanted. And they mean well, and they love, you know, they truly do love their loved ones. But it's difficult, you know. For me personally, when I first started using cocaine, I loved it. Then I hated it, but then I was a slave to it. So so just as it took 10 years to get to that habit, I had a habit of, I had to use it. It takes a while for it to get out of your system. So you have mentally, you know, it takes a while for your brain to I don't know if configure is the right word, but you know, to get the dopamine and the serotonin levels back to normal. But then, you know, you also have social issues, because it's like my whole life was revolved around drugs and substance abuse. So I was like, that's what I did. I went to bars, 'cause that's where I could do it and be accepted. So then I have to come to realize, is like, do I even like what I did? You know, so then you have to relearn that stuff. And then you have like I said, the social interactions, you have to make new friends. So it's just it's a process. And the difficult thing is people think when you go to a recovery program, it should just be hunky-dory, everything's perfect. You know, the normal is there might be a relapse.
Right.
And you still gotta love them in the midst of that. I don't mean enabling, I'm meaning love, you know? So sometimes people have to come back through a program. Some people, you know, and some people need longer time. Some people could probably do the 30-day program, you know, but when you're active in addiction for 10, 20 years, you know, decades, it's like you might need a year. And then even then, you know, you might need a couple, 2-3 years.
Yeah.
So they just have to be, it's hard. I don't know how to articulate it very well, but you can't put a timetable on somebody's healing.
Yeah.
What about you? What have
some things that I've found myself recently talking about in conversations is that specifically for our program, if you just want to be sober, this is not the program for you. It really is about a complete life change. And I've seen families struggle with that. I've seen residents struggle with that, because it's like they have to get to know themselves all over again. Be okay with your loved ones changing completely. Even the way they dress, how they compose themselves, how they communicate. And then another thing is be open to communication, because sometimes we just want to sweep the issues that led to the addiction under the rug and pretend like they didn't exist or that they don't matter. So if your loved one wants to talk about what happened, be a support and listen, and don't be so quick to make judgments, because you would have handled things differently. It's a long process. It is. It's really a long process, and it can be difficult for all parties involved, but it is worth going through.
If God allows us to go through a lifetime of sanctification, we can allow our loved ones a few months or years.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're in the recovery, your spouse or your wife is in recovery, it's going to be extremely difficult. But there's great hope in Jesus. And if somebody has taken an active step to come to a program or to try to get their life straight, that should be extremely encouraging to the spouse, because like they're the ones that took that initiative. Even if it's prompting, they still made that step. So guess what? Now encourage them, since they made that one step, to take the second step, and continue in their sobriety, continue in their relationship with Jesus. So it's just one of them where it can be discouraging, but you got to remember, like I said, it's a process. Allow God to do his work, and they've already taken the first couple steps, so you should be praising God for that. And
if your loved one or you say that you're ready for the next step and you need help, you need help accomplishing that, talk to your family, talk to your spouse.
Well, reach out to us.
I guess the point is there's hope, but reach out, because you aren't going to reach your goal by yourself. God created us to need community. So reach out and ask for help. If you don't know the next step to take, reach out and ask for help.